The world froze the moment a hand struck the maid's face. She was just doing her job when the slap echoed through the billionaire's mansion. But no one was prepared for what the billionaire did next. It would shake the walls of power, pride, and injustice across the globe. Clara had been working in Mr. Harrison's mansion for more than 15 years, and in all that time she had never once complained about her life. She woke before sunrise every single day, moving quietly through the big empty hallways, polishing the furniture, preparing the breakfast table, and making sure everything was in perfect order before the billionaire even stepped out of his room. To the outside world, she was just a maid in an old gray uniform. But inside the mansion, she was the heartbeat of the household. The other staff often admired her patience, her gentle smile, and the way she treated every corner of the mansion, as if it were her own home. Even Mr. Harrison, a man known for his sharp business mind and commanding presence, treated Clara with unusual respect because he had seen her loyalty and hard work for so many years. To him, she was more than an employee, she was like family. But not everyone who walked through the mansion saw her that way. Some new faces, especially the wealthy guests invited to dinners and parties, looked at her with cold eyes, whispering cruel things as if she could not hear. They judged her for the color of her skin, her age, and her simple clothes, never seeing the dignity and strength that kept her standing tall. Clara chose silence over argument, believing that respect was shown in actions, not in words. She endured the looks, the whispers, and the subtle insults, comforting herself with the thought that her work spoke louder than their arrogance. She believed that as long as she stayed loyal, no one could truly harm her. But what she did not know was that her silence would soon be tested in the most painful way. The evening of the grand dinner arrived, and the mansion glittered with light and laughter. Crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead, music floated softly through the air, and rows of silver trays carried the finest food and wine. Clara moved quietly through the hall, her hands steady, her face calm, carrying plates with the same care. She always did. For her, nights like these were normal. She had served countless guests in this house, and though many of them ignored her presence, she never let it bother her. Tonight, however, one guest was different. He was an arrogant business partner of Mr. Harrison, dressed in an expensive suit and speaking loudly as though the room belonged to him. When Clara walked past with a tray of glasses, he noticed one had a tiny chip on its edge. With a sharp sneer, he called her clumsy and unworthy. Clara, shocked but still respectful, quietly apologized and lowered her eyes, hoping the moment would pass. But before she could take the glass back, his hand shot across her face, delivering a slap so loud it silenced the entire room. The tray slipped from her fingers, crashing to the marble floor as wine spilled like blood across the tiles. Clara's eyes filled with tears, not from the sting of his hand, but from the crushing humiliation of being struck in front of dozens of strangers. The room froze. The other guests gasped, some covering their mouths, others staring in disbelief, but not one dared to step forward. The man smirked, muttering something about teaching servants a lesson, as if his cruelty were justified. Clara stood trembling, her cheek burning, her pride wounded, while the weight of silence pressed heavily on her shoulders. And then footsteps echoed from the grand staircase above, from the top of the grand staircase. Mr. Harrison appeared, his sharp eyes blazing with fire as he witnessed the scene below. He had arrived just in time to see Clara's trembling form, and the arrogant man's smirk of satisfaction. The billionaire, usually calm and composed, felt something rise in him that he had not felt in years, pure, uncontrollable fury. His footsteps thundered as he descended the stairs, each step echoing across the silent hall. Every guest turned to look at him, their faces pale, sensing the storm about to erupt. Harrison marched straight toward the man who had dared to touch Clara. His jaw was tight, his fists clenched, and his voice cut through the silence like a blade. "In my house," he roared, his words shaking the air. "Under my roof you dare lay a hand on her?" The arrogant guest laughed nervously, trying to dismiss the moment as a joke, claiming servants needed discipline. But that only fueled Harrison's rage. He stepped closer, his eyes fierce, his presence towering over the man. "She is not just a maid," Harrison thundered. She is family. She has given more loyalty than men like you could ever understand. And you dare to raise your hand against her? Gasps filled the hall as Harrison made his decision without hesitation. In front of every guest, he announced the end of every deal, every contract, and every business tie with the man. You are finished, he declared coldly. Leave my house and never return. The guest's face turned white, his pride shattered, as guards moved to escort him out. Clara stood frozen, her cheeks still stinging, but her heart suddenly lifted with pride. For the first time, the world had seen someone rise for her. The scandal inside the mansion did not stay hidden for long. By the next morning, videos and photographs had spread across social media, capturing the exact moment Mr. Harrison stood up for Clara and threw his powerful guest out. The world was shocked to see a billionaire breaking ties worth millions of dollars just to defend the dignity of his maid. News channels replayed the story again and again, showing Clara's tearful but brave face as she stood beside her employer. While headlines declared, "Billionaire protects Maid, ends deal with millionaire partner," people around the globe reacted with overwhelming support. Strangers who had never met Clara shared her story, calling her a symbol of quiet strength. Students, workers, mothers, and fathers from different countries spoke out on social platforms, saying that dignity matters more than wealth, even leaders. And celebrities praised Mr. Harrison for using his power not for greed, but for justice. Meanwhile, the arrogant guest who had slapped Clara was buried under shame. His name trended worldwide, but not with respect. It became a warning against cruelty. Companies began cutting ties with him, his reputation destroyed in just one night. While the world talked, Clara found it hard to believe what was happening. She had always been invisible, moving silently through the halls of the mansion, but now her face was on television screens across continents. What shocked her most was not the attention, but the fact that her employer had risked his business empire just to protect her pride. It was the first time in her life she felt seen, respected, and valued. The world was watching, but for Clara, the most powerful moment was realizing she was not alone anymore. A week later, the mansion felt different. The laughter of parties was gone, replaced by a quiet sense of peace. Clara moved through the halls, as she always had, but this time the staff greeted her with newfound respect, and even strangers sent her letters of support from across the world. She had never sought attention, yet she had become the center of a story that touched millions of hearts. One afternoon, Mr. Harrison invited her into his private study, a room filled with books, paintings, and the quiet weight of his success. Clara entered shyly, unsure why she had been called. On the desk lay a sealed envelope. Harrison smiled gently and handed it to her. Inside was not just a bonus or gift, it was the deed to a beautiful home, along with a letter promising her lifelong financial security. Clara's hands trembled as she read the words, her eyes filling with tears. "You've given me loyalty for 15 years, Clara," Harrison said softly. "You cared for this house as if it were your own. Now it's time you had something that is truly yours." She covered her face with her hands, overwhelmed, unable to speak through her tears. For the first time in her life, she felt valued not for the work of her hands, but for the worth of her soul. Outside the mansion, the world continued to speak of the slap and the billionaire's fury. But inside, a greater story had unfolded, a story of loyalty honored, dignity restored, and justice served. As Clara stepped out into the sunlight that evening, the weight of years seemed to lift from her shoulders. What had begun with cruelty had ended with hope, proving to the world that true greatness is measured not by wealth, but by how you protect the people who stand beside you.